The air in the boardroom was sterile, chilled to a precise 68 degrees. It smelled of industrial carpet cleaner and expensive, freshly brewed coffee. I ran my thumb over the edge of my leather-bound portfolio, the motion a small, grounding ritual in a world built of glass and polished steel. As a project manager, my life was a series of controlled variables, and this merger was the most complex equation I'd ever been tasked to solve. I was prepared. My data was irrefutable, my projections flawless. I had built a fortress of competence around myself, brick by meticulous brick, over 13 years in the industry. Then she walked in. The room's hushed energy shifted, a low hum of deference following her as she took the head of the table. They called her the lead director. Her charcoal suit was impeccably tailored, her hair pulled back in a severe, elegant knot that exposed the sharp line of her jaw. She moved with an economy of motion that spoke of years spent in rooms exactly like this one, commanding respect without raising her voice. But I wasn't looking at the suit or the posture. I was looking at the small, pale scar that bisected her left eyebrow, a tiny silver crescent I knew she'd gotten falling off a swing set in 7th grade, when I'd been the one to carry her to the school nurse, crying harder than she was. The fortress I'd spent 13 years building crumbled to dust. The portfolio in my hands felt slick with sudden sweat. My perfectly calibrated world tilted on its axis. Because the formidable executive at the head of the table wasn't just the lead director of our new partner company. She was Natalie, my childhood best friend, the girl who had once taught me how to map constellations from a high school rooftop, the girl whose name was a ghost I had long since learned not to speak, after she vanished without a trace the summer before our senior year. Her presentation began, her voice a smooth, confident alto that bore no trace of the teenager who used to whisper our wildest dreams to me in the dark. She spoke of synergy and stakeholder value, her hands gesturing toward a PowerPoint slide filled with complex financial models. My own team was rapt, scribbling notes. I sat frozen, a spectator in my own life, as the woman I'd once called my other half addressed the room like we were strangers. The clinical blue light of the projector flickered, and for a disorienting moment, it wasn't a pie chart on the screen, but a spray of stars against an inky, suburban sky. We were 17 again, sprawled on the tar-papered roof of Northwood High, sharing a single pair of cheap, crackling earbuds. We called ourselves the Starcatchers, a silly, honest name for two girls who felt like their real lives were happening somewhere up in that vast, silent darkness. We'd made a pact. We'd escape our suffocating little town together, build careers that made us unshakable, and never let anyone make us feel small. She was the bravest person I'd ever known, the only one who saw past my parents' suffocating expectations to the girl I really was. Until the day she vanished, and my world went silent. The memory was so sharp it was physically painful. I could almost smell the rain-slicked asphalt and the cheap cherry lip balm she always wore. I remembered the weight of her head on my shoulder as we listened to a scratchy mixtape, her laughter the only thing that made my parents' relentless pressure feel survivable. That was our bond. We were each other's safe place. Until the day she was gone, and every safe place I'd ever known vanished with her. I forced myself back to the present. Natalie was looking directly at me now, her expression unreadable. "Sophia," she said, and my name from her lips was a foreign object, sharp and clinical, nothing like the warm, teasing way she used to call my name as kids. "Your team's risk assessment seems optimistic. Can you walk us through the mitigation strategies for the Q3 supply chain vulnerabilities?" The question was a scalpel, precise and aimed at the weakest point in my proposal. It was a fair question, a professional one. But all I heard was the echo of the abandonment I'd carried for 13 years. The quiet judgment I'd imagined every day since she'd left. You couldn't keep up. You weren't enough to stay for. The betrayal I'd nursed for over a decade, the one that had fueled every late night and every sacrificed weekend, flared hot in my chest. I met her gaze. My voice, when it came out, was steady, colder than I intended. I walked her through the data, point by excruciating point. For the next hour, the boardroom became our battlefield. We engaged in a war of subtext, a duel fought with corporate jargon and pointed questions. Every time she challenged a data point, I saw the ghost of the girl who'd known every one of my fears. Every time I countered with a fact, I was the girl who'd been left behind, proving I could survive without her. The air crackled with a tension no one else in the room could possibly understand, the weight of 13 years of unspoken grief hanging between us. When the meeting finally adjourned, The room emptied with a shuffle of leather portfolios and polite murmurs. I stayed in my seat, gathering my papers with slow, deliberate movements, waiting. I knew she would wait, too. The silence that descended was heavier than all the words we had just spoken. It was a 13-year silence, filled with unspoken questions and the hollow echo of a goodbye that never happened. Finally, only the two of us remained, separated by the vast, polished expanse of the mahogany table. "You've done well for yourself," I said, the words feeling like gravel in my mouth. It was a meaningless corporate pleasantry, a flimsy shield for the rage and grief roaring beneath the surface. She didn't answer right away. She just watched me, her gaze intense, searching. The formidable executive mask seemed to slip for a fraction of a second, and I saw something raw and vulnerable in her eyes, the same look she'd had when her parents got divorced in 8th grade, when I'd sat with her on that same rooftop all night. "You're still here," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. "Why, Natalie? After all this time, why this project? Why my firm?" My voice was shaking, the professional composure I clung to finally shattering. "Why did you leave without a word? Why did you never reach out?" She walked around the table, stopping a few feet away from me. The scent of her perfume, something subtle, like green tea and rain, reached me, and it was so achingly different from the cherry lip balm of my memory. "Sophie," she said, using the childhood nickname no one had called me in over a decade, the name only she had ever been allowed to use. The single word was a key turning a lock I'd thought was rusted shut forever. The boardroom, the merger, the 13 years of carefully constructed anger, it all dissolved. My eyes burned with tears I refused to let fall. She took a hesitant step closer, her own eyes shimmering with unshed tears. In that sterile, empty room, we were no longer executives or rivals. We were just two women, staring at the ghost of a friendship that had defined every part of who we'd become. We ended up in a 24-hour diner 10 blocks away, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and the lingering smell of burnt coffee and old grease. It was anonymous, a world away from the glass tower we'd just left. The fluorescent lights were brutally honest, stripping away the last of our corporate armor. I stared into my mug of black coffee, watching the steam curl and disappear. "My parents told me you ratted us out," I said, my voice flat. "That you confessed everything to your mom about the rooftop, about us skipping class to go to the city for college tours. That's why they pulled me out, why we had to move across the state before senior year. That's the story I've been telling myself for 4,745 days. The story that turned my grief into a shield of anger." Natalie's hands were wrapped around her own mug, her knuckles white. She shook her head slowly. "No, Sophie. That's not what happened." She took a deep breath, the kind you take before diving into icy water. "Your mother found your diary. The one with the pressed daisy on the cover, the one you wrote all our college plans and your fears about your parents in." The air left my lungs. I remembered that diary. I had written everything in it, poured out all the frustrations and dreams a 17-year-old girl could hold, every secret I'd only ever shared with her. "She came to my house that night," Natalie continued, her voice quiet but steady, the pain of that night bleeding through every word. "She screamed at my parents, called me a corrupting influence, said I was ruining your perfect future. She said she was saving you from me. Our parents made a deal that night. They would separate us, transfer us to different schools, and we were never to contact each other again. My parents took my phone, my computer, locked me in the house for weeks. They told me if I tried to find you, your father would lose his job at the plant, that your family would be ruined. They said it was all my fault, that I destroyed everything." The coffee in my stomach turned to acid. The narrative that had defined my adulthood, the betrayal that had been the bedrock of my ambition, was a lie. It wasn't her. It was my own mother. You never tried to tell me?" "I tried," she whispered, and for the first time, I heard the full weight of 13 years of grief and helplessness in her voice. "I snuck out to a payphone 3 towns over, but your number was disconnected. I sent letters to your old address. They all came back unopened. I tried to find you online a few years later, but you'd changed your last name after college. There was no trace. It was like you had vanished off the face of the earth." She finally looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "This merger, Sophie, it wasn't an accident. I've been working toward this for 3 years. I tracked your career, watched you climb the ranks, knew your firm was the only one that could handle this merger. I fought every other executive on my board to be the lead on this project. It was the only way I could think of to find you, to get in the same room and finally make you listen to the truth. The truth was so much heavier, so much more complex than the simple story of teenage betrayal I had carried. She hadn't abandoned me. She'd been trapped, just like I had. And all this time, I had been hating a ghost, while the girl who'd been my safe place had spent over a decade trying to find her way back to me. We sat in that diner until the first gray light of dawn began to soften the edges of the city. The bitterness in my coffee mug was nothing compared to the bitterness I felt toward the lie that had stolen 13 years of our friendship. The anger I'd held for Natalie evaporated, leaving behind a vast, aching emptiness. It was the space where our friendship should have been growing for the last 13 years, where we should have celebrated each other's wins, held each other through losses, built the lives we'd dreamed of together. "I'm sorry," I finally managed to say, the words feeling woefully inadequate. "For all this time, I thought you'd left me behind. I hated you for it." "I know what you thought," she said, her voice gentle. "I probably would have thought the same thing, if I'd been in your shoes." She offered a small, sad smile. "We were just kids. They were the adults. They made the rules, and we had no way to fight back." In the quiet of that morning, we rebuilt the bridge between us, not just with memories of the past, but with the truths of the present. I told her about the suffocating pressure to succeed, the need to prove to myself and to my mother that I was strong enough on my own, that I didn't need anyone. She told me about navigating the cutthroat corporate world, the isolation of being the only woman in the boardroom, the constant feeling of having to be twice as good to get half the credit. We discovered that, though separated by a lie, we had been walking parallel paths all along, fighting the same invisible battles, clinging to the same dream of being unshakable. As we left the diner, the sun was casting long shadows down the empty street. "So, what now?" I asked. Natalie stopped and turned to me, her eyes bright with the same fire I'd seen on that rooftop all those years ago. "Now," she said, her voice firm with a conviction that resonated deep within me, "we finish what we started. We close this merger. But this time, we do it together. No more secrets. No more fighting each other. We fight the battles that matter, side by side." It wasn't the giddy, star-catching pact of 17-year-olds. It was something stronger, tempered by loss and time. It was the pact of two women who had found each other again in the trenches and realized they were, and always had been, on the same team. Our renewed alliance changed the atmosphere of the project overnight. Where there had been friction, there was now a seamless flow of information. We anticipated each other's needs, finishing each other's thoughts in strategy sessions, our years of unspoken connection translating effortlessly to the boardroom. Our teams, sensing the shift, began to collaborate with an efficiency that put us weeks ahead of schedule. But not everyone celebrated this newfound harmony. Mark, a senior director from my firm who had seen the merger as his ticket to a C-suite promotion, started to watch me with a thinly veiled hostility. He began to make small, undermining comments in meetings, questioning my data, jokingly suggesting I was getting preferential treatment from Natalie because of our long-lost friendship. One afternoon, he cornered me by the coffee machine. "Must be nice," he said with a syrupy smile, "to have the lead director in your pocket. Makes climbing the ladder a lot easier." The insinuation was clear and ugly, the kind of gendered attack women in this industry know all too well. I felt a familiar wave of cold dread. This was the kind of insidious corporate poison I had spent years learning to deflect, but never had the leverage to fight back against. But before I could even formulate a response, an email notification popped up on my phone. It was from Natalie. The subject line was simply, FYI. Attached was a meticulously compiled spreadsheet. It cross-referenced Mark's project history with his expense reports, highlighting a years-long pattern of inflated costs, missed deadlines, and falsified progress reports that he had consistently blamed on junior team members, most of them young women. At the bottom was a single line of text from her. "Knowledge is leverage. Use it to protect yourself and the women he's thrown under the bus." She hadn't confronted him. She hadn't reported him. She had quietly armed me. She had observed the threat, gathered the data, and provided me with an invisible shield. She was teaching me a new language of power, one where support wasn't about fighting someone's battles for them, but about giving them the weapons to win on their own, and to lift others up while doing it. The next time Mark tried to question my authority or undermine my team, I was ready. With Mark neutralized, I was able to dive deeper into the financials of the merger. It was late one night, surrounded by takeout containers and staring at rows of numbers on my screen that I saw it. A ghost in the machine. A series of payments to a third-party logistics contractor, Omnicorp, that didn't add up. The invoices were deliberately vague, the sums were substantial, and they were buried deep within a subsidiary account that was slated to be dissolved post-merger. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just poor accounting, it was deliberate. It had the distinct shape of long-term embezzlement. The amounts were large enough to jeopardize the entire merger if they came to light improperly, and to tank the careers of anyone tied to the account. If I raised the alarm alone, I'd be painting a massive target on my back. The person behind this would not go down quietly. My first instinct, born of years of self-reliance, was to handle it myself. To dig deeper, gather irrefutable proof, and present a perfect, unassailable case. But then I looked at the email from Natalie still open in a minimized window. Knowledge is leverage. Together. I picked up my phone. It was almost midnight, but I knew she'd be awake. She answered on the second ring. I found something, I said, no preamble needed. In the subsidiary ledgers. It's bad. It's embezzlement, and it's big enough to sink the merger. There was a pause, and then her voice came back, calm and steady, a lighthouse in a storm. Send me what you have. I'll start digging from my end. We look at this together. No more carrying this alone. The relief was so profound it almost buckled my knees. For the first time in my professional life, I wasn't alone with a crisis. The weight of the discovery was still immense, but it was no longer mine to carry by myself. We had a shared secret now, a dangerous one, and it bound us together more tightly than any corporate contract ever could. Our quiet investigation lasted for a week. We communicated through encrypted messages and late-night phone calls, piecing together the digital trail. It became clear that the embezzlement was sophisticated, orchestrated by someone with high-level access in both our companies, someone who knew the merger's timeline inside and out. We were close to identifying the source. Too close. The attack came suddenly and from all sides. An anonymous email was blasted to every board member of both firms and leaked to a major industry publication. It claimed that Natalie and I were using our childhood friendship to manipulate the merger, fabricating a financial crisis, the very one we were investigating, in order to devalue her company stock, allowing my firm to acquire it at a fire sale price, with a promised kickback for both of us. It painted us as colluding criminals, as two women who'd let their personal bond corrupt their professional integrity. The rumor spread like wildfire. The friendly collaboration between our teams evaporated, replaced by icy suspicion. Colleagues who had been congratulating me a week ago now avoided my eyes in the hallway. Our shared history, the source of our strength, had been twisted into a weapon and used against us. We were both called into separate, internal investigations, placed on temporary administrative leave from the merger. My boss, a man I had respected for years, looked at me with disappointment and doubt. You have to admit, Sophia, the optics are catastrophic, he said, sliding a copy of the anonymous email across his desk. A decades-long secret friendship, sudden, unwavering alignment, a financial irregularity. Only the two of you can see? It doesn't look good. The questions were relentless, invasive. They picked apart our past, twisting every detail into something sordid. Our childhood pact was painted as a premeditated conspiracy. Our professional synergy was framed as irrefutable evidence of collusion. The very philosophy of women supporting women was being portrayed as a malicious plot. We were isolated, explicitly forbidden from communicating with each other while the investigation was ongoing. They were trying to break us apart, and for the first time, I was terrified they would succeed. The isolation was a form of torture. For days, I was trapped in a cycle of interrogations and suspicion. The trust one had just rediscovered felt fragile again, threatened by the whispers in the hallways and the cold, assessing looks from my superiors. Every night, I would stare at my phone, my thumb hovering over Natalie's name, honoring the corporate decree that kept us apart, even as every part of me screamed to reach out. I finally saw her at the end of a grueling day, across the sterile expanse of the corporate parking garage. She looked exhausted, the confident lines of her posture softened by a weariness that mirrored my own. We converged near my car, an unspoken truce overriding the official gag order. "This is a nightmare," I said, my voice hoarse. "They're twisting everything we do, every part of who we are, against us." "They have to follow protocol, Sophie," she replied, though her tone lacked its usual conviction. "We just have to trust the process. Let the investigation play out. Something in her calm, measured response ignited a spark of my old fear, the fear that I would be abandoned again. Trust the process? I shot back, my voice rising. Natalie, they're about to fire us, to blacklist us from the entire industry. Your process and your protocol are getting us crucified. You're always so calculated, so 10 steps ahead. Did you not see this coming? Did you not think they'd use our friendship against us? Her face hardened. This isn't a game we can win by charging in blind. And what did you want me to do? You're the one who is so used to being betrayed that you were ready to believe the worst of me the second we stepped into that boardroom. Maybe you still believe it, deep down. Maybe you're just waiting for me to leave you again. The words struck a nerve, hitting the raw, unhealed part of me that was still terrified of being left alone. That's not fair. Isn't it? She said, her voice laced with a hurt that cut me deeper than my anger. I spent 13 years fighting to find you. I thought we were past this. I thought we finally trusted each other, no matter what. The chasm opened between us again, wide and dark. The trauma of our first separation, of words left unsaid and motives misunderstood, hung in the air. She looked at me, her expression a mixture of disappointment and pain, and for a terrifying moment, I thought she was going to turn and walk away, leaving me alone in the echoing silence of the garage. It felt like we were 17 all over again, being torn apart by forces we couldn't control. She didn't walk away. She just held my gaze for a long moment, then gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head and left without another word. The silence she left behind was worse than our shouting. I drove home in a daze, the argument replaying in my mind. Her words stung because they held a kernel of truth. A part of me was still waiting for the other shoe to drop, still scared to trust that she wouldn't be taken from me again. But as I sat in my silent apartment, staring at the case files spread across my floor, another feeling began to surface, a fierce, protective certainty. I would not let them do this to us. I would not let a lie separate us again. Not after we'd just found each other. I spent the next 3 nights fueled by coffee and a cold, focused rage. I shut out the world and dove back into the Omnicorp ledgers. I couldn't call her, but I could work. I could find the truth. And as I traced the tangled web of transactions, I started to notice something strange. There were markers in the data, subtle anomalies, a specific invoice coding we'd made up as kids to label our secret plans, a recurring timestamp that matched the time we used to sneak up to the rooftop every Friday night. They weren't accidents. They were breadcrumbs. And then I understood. Before we were cut off, Natalie must have found these. She hadn't been able to tell me directly, but she knew my methodology. She knew I was meticulous, that I would go over every line item, that I would recognize the codes we'd created as kids. She had trusted me to see the pattern she'd found. It was a message sent across the corporate divide, a silent act of faith in me, in our friendship. It was her telling me, without words, that she still trusted me, that we were still a team. The breadcrumbs led me to a single, irrefutable access point, Mark's executive login. He hadn't just been smearing me, he was the mastermind behind the embezzlement. He had created the Omnicorp shell company and had been siphoning funds for 2 full years, planning to use the merger as cover to dissolve the subsidiary and erase his tracks forever. He was the one who sent the anonymous email, a desperate act of self-preservation to discredit us before we could expose him. He'd counted on our isolation to break us, to keep us from putting the pieces together. He'd underestimated the bond we'd built, even after 13 years apart. On the morning of the final arbitration hearing, I walked into the lobby of my firm and saw Natalie waiting by the elevators. We didn't speak about our argument in the parking garage. We didn't need to. I just met her eyes and gave a single, firm nod. She gave a small, sharp nod back, the same one she'd given me before we'd snuck out to the rooftop all those years ago. She understood. We were ready. We walked into that boardroom, not as 2 separate individuals under investigation, but as a unified front. The same executives who had looked at us with suspicion were seated around the table, their expressions grim. Mark was there, looking smug and self-assured, like he'd already won. My boss started the proceedings. Sophia, Natalie, we've reviewed the allegations against you, and the board is prepared to render a decision. Before you continue, I interrupted, my voice clear and steady. I placed my tablet on the table and projected its screen onto the main monitor. We have something to show you. The full truth. For the next 20 minutes, we laid out the case, flawlessly in sync. I presented the financial trail, the coded invoices, the impossible timestamps, the irrefutable link to Mark's login. Natalie followed, explaining the corporate architecture Mark had exploited, her executive-level understanding of the system, making the complex fraud devastatingly simple to comprehend. We didn't just defend ourselves. We exposed the real crime and the pattern of abuse Mark had inflicted on junior employees for years. We moved in perfect sync, a seamless presentation of data and strategy, the same way we'd mapped constellations together as kids, each of us filling in the gaps the other missed. I watched Mark's face as the evidence mounted. The smugness drained away, replaced by a pasty, sickly pallor. The final slide was a network diagram showing the flow of money directly from our firm's accounts through the Omnicorp shell and into an offshore account registered in his wife's maiden name, complete with transaction confirmations he'd thought he deleted forever. The silence in the room was absolute. The board stared at the screen, then at Mark, then back at us. In that moment, we weren't the accused anymore. We were the women who had brought the truth to light. It wasn't just a vindication of our names. It was a reclamation of our power, a testament to a bond that refused to be broken, no matter how much time or distance or lies were thrown in its way. A month later, the dust had settled. The merger was back on track, finalized with record efficiency. Mark was fired, banned from the industry, and under criminal investigation. Our reputations were not just restored, but enhanced. We were celebrated for our integrity and our ability to root out corruption, even at great personal risk. On a crisp autumn Saturday, we drove 2 hours out of the city, back to the suburban town we had both spent years running from. The fence around Northwood High was taller than I remembered, but we found the same loose section behind the bleachers, the one we'd pried open with a screwdriver when we were 16. The climb up the fire escape to the roof felt strangely familiar, our bodies remembering a path our minds had almost forgotten. The roof was exactly the same, the gritty tar paper, the distant hum of the highway, the sprawling view of the town that had once felt like the entire world. We sat on the edge, our legs dangling over the side, just as we had hundreds of times before. Natalie handed me a small paper cup. It was a scoop of cheap, artificially flavored strawberry ice cream from the corner store down the street. The same kind we used to save up our allowances to buy, the kind we'd eaten on this roof the night we made our Starcatchers pact. The taste was a shock of nostalgia, sweet and cold and simple. "I can't believe this place is still here," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Some things are built to last," she replied, looking out at the horizon, then over at me with a soft smile. "Even when they're apart for a while." We didn't talk about the merger or the investigation or the 13 years we had lost. We didn't need to. Up here, under the vast, open sky, we were just Sophie and Natalie again. We ate our ice cream in comfortable silence, watching the sun begin to set, painting the clouds in shades of orange and pink. We were making a new memory to lay over the old ones, a quiet act of reclaiming our shared past and integrating it into our present. The years of silence and misunderstanding hadn't erased the foundation we had built up here. They had only made it clearer how much it was worth fighting for. Back in the city, life found a new rhythm. Our professional collaboration was a given, but it was our reborn friendship that became the true anchor of our lives. We fell into an easy routine of late-night strategy sessions that bled into conversations about life, of grabbing lunch not to discuss work, but just to exist in the same space for an hour, of showing up for each other's wins and losses, the way we'd promised we would when we were 17. Natalie's return hadn't just saved my career. It had rescued me from the profound isolation I hadn't even realized I was living in. She reminded me that vulnerability wasn't a liability and that asking for help was a form of strength, that I never had to do anything alone again. We both made a conscious effort to pay it forward. Natalie started a formal mentorship program for junior female executives at her company, pairing them with senior women leaders to help them navigate the pitfalls of the corporate world. I made a point of championing the young women on my own team, ensuring their voices were heard and their work was recognized, shielding them from the kind of subtle undermining and gendered attacks I had faced for years. We were forging the kind of supportive network we'd never had when we were starting out. The philosophy of women supporting women wasn't just a catchphrase for us. It was a practice, a guiding principle born from our own fractured and rebuilt story. One afternoon, a young analyst on my team, facing a difficult situation with a senior colleague who was taking credit for her work, came to my office looking defeated. I listened to her, and then I shared a heavily redacted version of my own story with Mark. I told her about data, about leverage, and about the power of a strategic ally who has your back. I saw a spark of hope return to her eyes. In that moment, I realized our story wasn't just ours anymore. It was a blueprint for every woman who has ever been made to feel like she has to fight alone. On my desk, I now keep a small, double-sided picture frame. On one side is a faded photograph from that high school rooftop, two 17-year-old girls with goofy grins and identical star-shaped barrettes in their hair, squinting into the sun, their arms slung around each other's shoulders. On the other side is a photo we took last week, outside our office building after closing the final stage of the merger. We're standing side by side, no longer girls but women. The grins are different now, less goofy, more knowing, but they are just as genuine. Our arms still slung around each other's shoulders, just like they were all those years ago. Our friendship isn't a fairy tale. It isn't seamless or perfect. It is a living thing, marked by a deep scar of time and loss, but it is resilient. It's a choice we make every day, to trust, to support, to show up, even when it's hard. It's the quiet confidence of knowing that whatever challenge comes next, whatever corporate battle or personal storm, I am not walking the tightrope alone. As I pack my briefcase for the day, my eyes land on the frame. The two photos, past and present, are a testament to the fact that some bonds are not broken by time or distance, only tested. They are a reminder that the most valuable assets we have are not listed on any corporate ledger. The horizon ahead is wide and uncertain, full of its own complex equations. But for the first time in a very long time, I am not afraid. Because I know that just beyond the frame, my fellow starcatcher is there, ready to help me navigate the darkness. And together, we are strong enough to reach for anything.